The stage lights painted the auditorium a warm gold, catching dust in the air like slow-moving fireflies. Programs rustled. The string quartet stitched soft music into the silence between names. I stood at the podium with my speech balanced on a flat palm, scanning the family section the way a lighthouse searches waves for a single boat. 5 seats waited with my name on them. They stayed empty, their white chair backs bright as teeth. My mouth shaped words I had practiced for weeks, but my throat was full of cotton. A camera shutter clicked from the far aisle. Somewhere a little boy whispered, "There she is." I shifted my weight to keep from swaying and let my eyes rest on those blank spaces again. 3 in a row, 2 just behind like an outline no one bothered to color. The dean smiled up at me, fingers steepled. The applause that rose when I finished sounded kind but far away, like rain on a roof I didn't live under. Outside on the lawn, families folded around their graduates in easy constellations, bouquets caps askew, fathers wiping eyes. They swore were just allergies. I held my diploma against my ribs and pretended the breeze was why my hands shook. When my phone vibrated, I let it. The screen lit with a name I didn't look at. The 5 empty seats burned brighter than the sun. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. If you've ever stood in a room full of cheers and felt completely alone, hit the like button, share this with someone who'll understand, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next. To understand why those chairs mattered, why their blankness said more than any apology ever could, you'd have to know the house I grew up in and the quiet lessons it taught. I come from a neighborhood where porch lights clicked on at 6, where every cul-de-sac had a basketball hoop with a net short a few strings. Our oak dining table bore the indent of every school project and grocery list. Dad's briefcase lived by the door, polished leather, never dusty. Mom's calendar hung on the fridge, rectangles packed with bake sales, theater rehearsals, football games, and potluck nights where she carried her famous potato salad like a trophy you didn't have to earn. In that house, being easy was a virtue. Sarah was easy to love, out loud laughter like a bell hair that caught light, a knack for turning any errand into a parade. Dylan was easy to cheer for, cleats on the mat, tape on his fingers, scores you could point to under Friday lights. I learned early that the best way to keep our home calm was to stay out of the center. I lined my pencils, folded my sweaters, and came to love the promise of lists. If you do everything right, you won't be a burden. There were moments that taught me otherwise. Being 7 and waiting after piano for a car that didn't come until the sky turned the blue of a bruise. Winning a science fair ribbon while Dad filmed 20 minutes of Dylan's scrimmage across town. The explanations were practical, even reasonable, and because they were reasonable, the lesson carried more weight. "We'll get you next time, sweetie. You understand, don't you?" I did. Understanding became my specialty. I understood why Sarah's dress fitting meant we'd push my doctor's appointment to next month. I understood why the savings we'd discussed for textbooks turned into a Cancun trip that would calm her nerves. I understood why "we're so proud of you" always came with a hand on Sarah's shoulder, as if pride were a finite commodity and she was the best investment. At college, I learned to be 2 things at once. In daylight, I was the student who showed up early, eyes clear, notes neat with questions I didn't ask, in a voice that trembled. At night, I carried trays at the restaurant 2 blocks off campus until my shoulders ached in the good way, the way that says you earned tonight's sleep. My parents called on Sundays, and I told cheerful truths. My schedule's full, the labs are exciting. I met with Professor Winters because the whole story felt like too much to hand them when their arms were already full of Sarah. 2 months before graduation, during a family video call, Sarah announced a barbecue, May 15th. Jason's parents flying in from California. Can you imagine? The screen split into faces, Mom making impressed noises, Dad reaching out of frame for something he'd dropped, Dylan pretending not to be listening while he absolutely was. I felt my jaw tighten and asked calmly, the way people who are never the problem learn to ask, if she remembered what else May 15th was. "Totally forgot, but it's fine. she said with a sunshine shrug. Barbecue at 4, your thing in the morning, we'll do both. Mom nodded, already picturing platters. Dad, summoned back to attention, assured me they wouldn't miss it for the world. The knot in my stomach tried to believe him, because believing is a way of staying in the family you were given. In the weeks that followed, I walked the campus paths like they were cords under my fingers, brick underfoot, magnolia, high and sweet. My speech took shape with Professor Winter's careful pencil notes in the margins. I bought a navy dress on sale that wouldn't wrinkle in a folding chair, and told myself the cost was an investment in the memory we'd make together. I reserved 5 seats and printed the confirmation just to hold it. The morning of commencement, the air had that early summer polish, sun-bright shade cool, a hint of cut grass rising off the lawn. Olivia pressed a coffee into my hand and said I looked like the version of myself I'd been working toward. Her parents were already on the road. Her mom had texted me a heart at 7:12 a.m. I stared at our group chat and typed directions to the family section, then deleted them, then typed them again with a smiley face, because I didn't want to sound like I was bracing for something. Backstage, the curtains held their own weather-warm, papery, a little stale, like old programs and old promises. I peeked through the gap between panels as the hall filled. A father in a blue jacket adjusted his tie 3 times. A grandmother smoothed a tissue she was saving for later. At 10:45, I texted, "Are you close?" and watched the little gray dots pulse, then disappear. When the dean introduced me, the quartet paused mid-page, and the hall quieted into a listening shape. I stepped to the mic and felt the wood of the lectern steady under my fingertips. The first sentences landed where I'd aimed them, soft at the edges, firm in the middle. Somewhere in the wings, Olivia's laugh caught when I mentioned resilience in storms. I glanced up exactly once and found the row where my 5 should have been. The chairs were pristine. The aisle between them looked like space left for a miracle. It didn't come. I delivered the rest the way you walk through an evening you'd planned for in another season, head-high shoes, a hair too tight, everything shining a little brighter to compensate. When they read my name, I crossed the stage with a practiced smile that felt like a bridge I was building even as my stomach dropped into the river below. The tassel slid left, everyone clapped on cue, and the applause rose and fell like weather I couldn't influence. On the lawn, strangers made room for each other. Cameras clicked. A cheer went up as someone's grandfather lifted an arm and declared himself 90 years young. Olivia found me and wrapped me in the kind of hug that says, I saw it too. Her parents, sweet people who never made me feel like an extra, took photos like they were holding something sacred steady. "We're so proud of you, both of you," her mom said, and for a second, I let those words sit where the other ones should have. My phone buzzed again. I glanced down, expecting a late arrival text running in save us spots, and instead found a square of sunlit images. Sarah's social feed, a backyard table draped in gingham, a bowl of my mother's potato salad flecked with paprika like confetti, Dad at the grill in his Red Sox cap, smoke curling like a ribbon. Dylan barefoot in the grass, a frisbee mid-arc. The timestamp sat where a heart should be. 11:07 a.m. My chest went cold, a slow pour of winter under summer air. Another photo, Sarah laughing, face tilted to the light, Jason's arms slung casual around her shoulders. The caption read, "Best kind of Saturday family and sunshine." I stared until the letters blurred, then lifted my eyes to the shade of a maple and tried to breathe like nothing important had just shifted on its hinges. Messages began to stack. Mom, call me now, urgent. Dad. Important family matter, answer, ASAP. Sarah, 12, missed calls, then 24, then 36. The numbers didn't make sense against the photos where the only emergency was a lighter that wouldn't spark. Olivia watched my face and asked nothing for a full 10 seconds. When I finally said, "They were never coming," I heard how quiet it sounded, heavy as a church door. We went to lunch because that's what people who love you insist on when you've forgotten how to feed yourself. The waitress called me Grad and slid a slice of pie onto the table on the house. Olivia's father raised his water glass and said a few sentences that were simple and perfect, the way simple things often are. Hard work deserves witnesses. Your name means something. We see you. I nodded and let my phone go dark in my bag. For an hour, I chose the small, warm world in front of me over the cold one on the screen. Back in our apartment, the light fell through the blinds in soft bars across the couch. I set my diploma on the coffee table like it might burn a ring into the wood if I didn't. The apartment held the day's heat and the faint smell of dish soap. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor laughed. Somewhere far away, my childhood backyard clattered with plates. I took my phone out at last and scrolled through the messages, urgent, 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 as if urgency could erase absence. Anger rose clean and bright, and for once, I didn't smother it with understanding. I thought about 7-year-old me on a piano bench, 12-year-old me with a ribbon curling under a paperweight, 23-year-old me standing under stage lights like a lighthouse looking for boats that never intended to leave shore. The pattern wasn't an accident. Patterns rarely are. I typed one line into the family chat, "I'm safe. I'll call when I'm ready," and pressed send. The screen lit up with an incoming call before the message even showed as delivered. I turned the phone face down, then turned it off entirely, feeling the room grow quieter by degrees. The air conditioner kicked on with a low hum, and I listened until my pulse slowed to match it. Outside, somewhere in the city, a car horn echoed twice and faded. I stood and crossed to the window. The street below was ordinary mail truck, elm trees, a jogger with a red band around her knee, but my reflection in the glass held a new stillness. In the pane, I could see the navy dress I'd picked for photographs that didn't get taken. I could see my shoulders squared, not for a fight, but for a decision. In the corner, Olivia watched me watch the window and didn't fill the space with advice. What now, she asked, finally voiced soft enough that the question didn't feel like a demand. I drew the blinds halfway, letting the room dim the way a theater does before a film begins. "Now," I said, and surprised myself with how even it sounded. I let them wait. The porch light of the house I grew up in would be on by now, catching moths in its glow. The grill would be cooling. The stories would be told the way they always were. Sarah at the center, everyone else orbiting. I released the blind's cord and listened to the faint clatter as it settled against the sill. A decision isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as choosing not to answer a ringing phone. In the hush that followed with the apartment tipped toward evening and the first hint of rain tapping faintly at the window, I felt something shift inside me. Not a break, not yet, but the beginning of distance. Part 2 would start there, in that space between a call and a call back, where silence can be a boundary and a doorway at the same time. The first evening after graduation slipped into night like a tide that wouldn't stop pulling. Rain had started to fall, light steady, tapping the window in small, patient rhythms. I sat on the couch, still wearing the navy dress my diploma propped on the coffee table, beside an untouched slice of pie from lunch. The silence in our apartment felt heavier than it should have been. Olivia moved quietly in the kitchen, pretending not to watch me, but I could feel her eyes every few minutes, soft with worry. When I finally reached for my phone, the screen lit with a dozen missed calls. Sarah, Mom, Dad, all stacked one after another. I scrolled through the messages without opening them, feeling that same pulse of anger I'd been holding back since the ceremony. They had missed it by choice, not mistake. They had smiled for photos while I searched for them in a crowd that never looked my way. The phone buzzed again in my hand. Sarah. I stared at her name until it stopped ringing. Another call came immediately after. Mom this time. I let it ring too. When it finally went quiet, I turned the phone over and pressed it face down against my thigh. "They can wait," Olivia said softly from the doorway. I nodded, though a part of me already knew I wouldn't be able to let it go that easily. "They said it was urgent," I murmured. "Everything's urgent when it's their story to tell," she said, moving closer. "Not when it's your pain." Her words landed like a truth I'd known, but never said out loud. I tried to let the quiet fill in again, but it only made the questions louder. What could they possibly want now? What could be so important after ignoring what mattered most to me? The rain grew heavier. I stood and walked to my room, closing the door behind me. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from Dad. "Important family matter. Call home." I stared at the words until they blurred, then exhaled sharply. Whatever it was, I didn't owe them tonight. I sent one short message to the family group chat. "I'm safe. I'll call tomorrow. Celebrating with friends." Then I silenced the notifications completely. When I finally lay down, exhaustion crept in, not from the day's events, but from the years behind them. The small disappointments I'd folded away like old receipts. Every missed recital, every forgotten birthday, every conversation that ended with me understanding again. I woke just before dawn. The air felt heavy the way it does before summer storms. Olivia was still asleep, a lamp left on low beside her. I watched the shadows on the wall shift with each passing car, and something inside me settled into clarity. I couldn't rest until I knew the truth, whatever it was. By 7, I was dressed and ready. I scribbled a note for Olivia, went to see them. "Don't worry," and left it on the counter beside her favorite mug. The drive home was 3 hours of gray sky and winding highways. Every mile felt like a replay of the years I'd spent trying to earn a place at that table. When the familiar street came into view, my stomach turned cold. The maple trees leaned over the sidewalk just as they always had. The house looked exactly the same, fresh paint, perfect lawn, the kind of calm that hides things. I parked across the street and sat for a moment, letting the engine tick as it cooled. The sound of laughter drifted from the backyard. Plates clinking music faint through the open windows. Not the sound of an emergency. I stepped out and crossed the street, the smell of grilled food rising with the damp air. Dylan opened the door before I could knock. His face held surprise, then something like relief. "You're here," he said quietly. "I am," I replied, "and I'd like to know why there were 36 missed calls from Sarah if everyone's doing so well." He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. "She's upset," he said finally. "Really upset." "About what?" "My graduation?" I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes darting toward the noise behind him. "She said you told everyone it was next weekend." "She found out today it wasn't." The words landed with a weight that made me blink. "That's a lie." Before I could say more, Mom appeared behind him, her hands twisting in the hem of her blouse. Her expression flickered between guilt and relief. "Alicia, thank goodness. We were so worried." "Worried," I repeated quietly. "Now you're worried." She stepped forward, trying to hug me, but I held still. "You said there was an emergency," I said. "What's going on?" She looked to Dad, who had come into the hallway, his face tight and unreadable. "Sweetheart, there's been a misunderstanding," he began. "Sarah showed us a message from you saying graduation was next weekend. We thought you changed the date." My pulse quickened. "Show me the message." Sarah appeared then, eyes-red phone already in her hand. "It's right here," she said defensively. "You sent it last month." She scrolled and held the screen out. The message read, "Graduation got moved to next Saturday at 2. The 15th didn't work for the faculty. I stared at it, cold creeping up my neck. I never sent that. You know I never sent that. Sarah crossed her arms, voice trembling but defiant. It came from your number. Mom took the phone, her brow furrowing. It does look like your number, honey. Because she used an app, I said, quietly. A fake text generator. Dad frowned. Alicia, that's a serious accusation. Dylan's voice broke in, hesitant but clear. She had something like that on her phone last week. I saw it. She said it was a prank app. The silence that followed was thick and uneven. Mom's face drained of color. Dad's mouth opened then closed again. Sarah's eyes darted between us, her breath quickening. Fine, she said finally. Yes, I sent it. I just wanted the day to work for everyone. Jason's parents were flying in. And you lied, I interrupted softly. You made sure the one day meant to be mine disappeared under yours. She flinched. But the tears that came weren't for me. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It always goes this far, I said. Dad stepped forward, palms raised. Enough, both of you. Sarah made a poor choice, but this isn't worth tearing the family apart. Isn't it? I asked. You've spent years pretending these choices don't add up to something bigger. He looked startled by the steadiness in my voice. I could see him searching for the old version of me, the one who would have smoothed everything over. She wasn't there anymore. Mom touched my arm gently. Honey, please, let's not do this now. Sarah's engagement announcement was supposed to be today. The words hit harder than I expected. Engagement, I whispered. Sarah nodded, wiping her face quickly. Jason proposed last week. I was going to tell everyone today. That's why I laughed once low and hollow. That's why you did it. Mom turned to her with a sudden burst of joy. Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful news. I watched her cross the room to embrace Sarah. The sound of their muffled congratulations blurred into the background. In that instant, I realized nothing I said or did would change the shape of this family. The pattern was the same as it had always been. Dad cleared his throat, trying to reassert calm. Alicia, your mother's right. Let's all just sit down and talk like adults. Adults, I repeated, tasting the word. Adults don't lie to each other and call it love. Sarah's expression hardened. You're overreacting. It's just a graduation. My breath caught. It was my day, the one thing I asked for. The room held its breath. Even Dylan stayed quiet. I could see guilt flickering in his eyes, the first sign that maybe he understood. I stepped back toward the door, the air around me suddenly too tight. I can't do this, I said. Not again. Mom reached out, voice trembling. Where are you going? Home? I said simply. And not the one with this address. Dad took a step forward. You can't just walk away from your family. I met his eyes and said what I should have said years ago. You did first. The door shut behind me with a soft click, not a slam. The night air felt cooler than I remembered. I walked to my car keys, trembling in my hand, but my steps were sure. Dylan called after me, once his voice cracking, but I kept walking. When I reached the car, I turned back for a moment. Through the front window, I saw movement, Mom clutching Sarah, Dad speaking with that calm authority he used when settling client disputes. And Sarah, even through the glass still center stage, still the one everyone leaned toward. I sat in the driver's seat and closed my eyes. For a long minute, I didn't move. The sound of cicadas filled the dark, and somewhere down the street, a porch light flickered on. My hands were steady when I started the engine. The drive back was quiet, except for the hum of the tires on wet pavement. I didn't cry. I didn't even think much. I just drove. Each mile felt like peeling away another layer of something I'd carried too long: expectation guilt, the idea that if I was perfect enough, they'd finally see me. By the time I reached my apartment, the rain had stopped. The city air smelled clean again. Olivia was waiting by the window, arms folded, eyes searching my face. "Well?" she asked softly. "It was worse than I thought," I said, setting my keys down. She nodded slowly, as if she'd already guessed. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not yet." We stood in silence for a while, the only sound the faint hum of traffic below. Then I looked at her and said, "I think it's time I stop waiting for them to notice me." Her expression softened. "Then what will you do instead?" I exhaled. "Build something that doesn't depend on their approval." Outside, the streetlights flickered against puddles, throwing back a shimmer of light like small promises. I felt something inside me settle, not peace yet, but resolve. The kind that comes quietly, like the first deep breath after holding your lungs too long. Somewhere behind me, my phone began to ring again. I didn't move. The sound faded, then stopped. The apartment grew still. I sat by the window until dawn, watching the sky lighten, the city waking, and the first faint sense of distance forming enough space to start over. Morning light slipped through the blinds in narrow bands of gold, brushing across the half-packed boxes that lined my living room. I'd barely slept. The argument, the drive, every word from the night before still echoed in my head like an unfinished song. I poured a cup of coffee and sat by the window, letting the warmth ground me. The city outside moved as if nothing had happened. Cars passed, people walked their dogs, someone laughed down the hall. For everyone else, it was just another day. For me, it felt like a threshold. My phone lay face down on the table. I knew what waited there: more messages, more apologies that weren't apologies at all. Instead, I opened my laptop and reread the email that had come during the drive home. It was from Preston Behavioral Health Center in Seattle. They'd received my research submission, and Professor Winters had personally recommended me for an interview. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. Seattle felt impossibly far, and yet the name alone felt like a door I might finally walk through. When Olivia shuffled in, hair pulled up, eyes still sleepy, she found me at the table, coffee gone cold. "You're already up," she said, her voice soft. "I don't think I slept much," I admitted. "But I got an email from Preston Behavioral Health. They want to interview me." She blinked, processing. "The Preston Center, Alicia, that's huge." I nodded, though part of me was afraid to believe it. "It feels like a sign. Maybe it's time to start somewhere new." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes when you see someone stepping into who they were meant to be. "Seattle's a long way from Boston," she said, then added gently, "But maybe that's the point." The week passed quietly. I kept to my apartment, working on my interview materials, reviewing my thesis, and reaching out to Professor Winters for guidance. She responded the same day, proud and reassuring. Her belief in me filled the silence where my family's support should have been. Every email from her felt like a hand at my back, steady and kind. By Wednesday, the calls from home had slowed, but not stopped. When I finally opened my messages, there were dozens, Mom's long paragraphs, shifting from worried to wounded, Dad's clipped sentences about responsibility and family loyalty, Dylan's short, uncertain check-ins. Sarah's name appeared only once, a single text. I said I was sorry. "You're overreacting." I read it twice, then deleted it. The interview was scheduled for Friday morning. I decided to wear the same navy dress I'd bought for graduation, the one that never made it into any family photos. When I looked at myself in the mirror, it didn't feel like a reminder of what I'd lost. It felt like reclamation. The person looking back at me had learned something hard and necessary. Sometimes dignity means walking away before anyone claps for you. The call began right on time. Dr. Chen, the center's director, spoke with a calm precision that reminded me of the professors I'd admired most. He asked about my research on family dynamics and resilience, and as I answered, I realized how much of my own life had shaped that work. I spoke not about theory, but about empathy, how children learn to adapt, to neglect, without ever naming it, how people rebuild when they stop waiting to be chosen. The panel listened closely. Dr. Chen smiled once, saying, "Your perspective comes from lived understanding. That's rare." When the interview ended, I sat in stillness for a long time. The screen went dark, and I saw my reflection, tired, yes, but grounded in a way I hadn't been before. Olivia peeked in a few minutes later, holding 2 mugs of tea. "Well?" she asked. "I think it went well," I said, smiling for the first time in days. I didn't have to try to sound like anyone else. She set the mugs down and squeezed my shoulder. "Then you already won." That weekend, I ignored the messages that still came from home. I cleaned the apartment, sorted old papers, and packed a few boxes, even though I didn't know if I'd need them. Preparing made me feel steady, as if I were moving towards something rather than away from it. On Sunday night, I checked my phone one last time before bed. A new email waited in my inbox from Dr. Chen. My hands shook as I opened it. "We are pleased to offer you the research associate position at Preston Behavioral Health Center." The words blurred for a moment as my throat tightened. After everything, something in the world had finally said yes. Olivia found me sitting at the kitchen table, half laughing, half crying. "Seattle," I whispered. "I got it." She hugged me so tightly I had to catch my breath. "I knew you would. You deserve this, Alicia." Over the next few days, I began making arrangements, leasing my apartment to a new tenant, forwarding mail, scheduling the move. My parents' messages grew more frantic once I told them I'd accepted the position. Mom's tone shifted from pleading to guilt-laced warnings. Dad wrote long messages about family unity and the importance of communication. Only Dylan's voice stayed gentle. "You deserve to be happy," he texted one night. "I'm sorry, I didn't speak up sooner." I stared at his message for a long time, then replied, "You did tonight. That's what matters." The morning the movers came, the apartment looked bare, the echo of my footsteps filling every corner. Olivia helped me tape the last box shut. "You sure about this?" she asked. "I've never been more sure," I said. "I think I need to find out who I am when I stop trying to fix everyone else." She smiled sadly. "Promise me you'll write." "I will," I said. "And you have to visit." The drive to the airport was quiet. The sky had that early summer haze where everything looks softer than it is. When the plane lifted off, I looked down at the city that had held both my exhaustion and my becoming. Somewhere below was the family I couldn't fix, the life I'd outgrown, and the version of myself who still believed love had to be earned. Seattle greeted me with the scent of rain and pine. The air was cool, the light diffuse and gray in a comforting way. My apartment overlooked Puget Sound, small, simple, with wide windows and a view of the ferry lines cutting through the water. I unpacked a single box that first night, just enough to make it feel like a beginning. Work at Preston began the following week. Dr. Chen met me in the lobby, his manner calm but warm. "You'll find your footing quickly here," he said. "Your work matters to what we're building." For the first time in years, I believed it. My days filled with purpose, data analysis, group sessions, writing reports. I wasn't invisible here. My input was requested, my presence acknowledged. Each evening, I walked home past the waterfront and watched the ferries drift like lanterns toward the horizon. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived with my old family address scrawled across the back in my mother's handwriting. I hesitated before opening it. The words inside were tangled part apology, part explanation. She said they were proud that they wanted to make amends that things had gotten out of hand. I read it twice, folded it carefully, and set it in a drawer. I wasn't ready to respond. Not yet. Instead, I poured myself a cup of tea and stood by the window. The sun was setting behind the Olympic Mountains, painting the sky in soft oranges and lavender gray. Below, the city lights began to bloom steady and kind. I realized I wasn't waiting for anyone to call. The silence felt like peace. Later that week, Dr. Chen stopped by my office. "There's talk of expanding the resilience study," he said. "I'd like you to lead the data design if you're interested." I nodded, trying not to smile too wide. "I'd love to." When he left, I leaned back in my chair, letting the moment sink in. The girl who once begged for recognition was gone. The woman taking her place didn't need permission to exist. That night, I walked to the edge of the pier and let the wind push through my hair. The water below shimmered under the city's glow. I thought of Grandma Rose, her gentle voice years ago, telling me that some people will never see your worth until you stop standing where they expect you to be. I finally understood what she meant. As the ferry horn sounded in the distance, I whispered a quiet promise to myself to keep choosing spaces that made me feel seen, to build a life measured not by anyone's approval, but by peace. Behind me, the city hummed with life. Ahead of me, the horizon opened wide and unguarded. And somewhere between those two places, I finally felt like I belonged to myself. Spring in Seattle came quietly that year. The air carried a faint sweetness from the cherry trees near the harbor, and the rain no longer felt endless, just steady, predictable, like a rhythm you learn to live alongside. By then, I had settled into a life that felt both simple and full. My mornings began with coffee and the hum of the ferry horns across Puget Sound. My evenings ended with the slow hush of the city under mist. For the first time, I was living days that didn't need anyone's approval to feel complete. The Preston Center had become more than a workplace. It was a kind of family built from purpose. Dr. Chen often stopped by my office with quiet questions, and the kind of encouragement that didn't need grand gestures to be felt. Maria from data analysis had a laugh that carried through the halls, and Jason, the barista from the cafe downstairs, had started saving my order without asking. Even that small kindness felt new, something steady and unearned. The research project I'd been leading focused on resilience, how people recover when family becomes a source of pain instead of comfort. Each interview, each story we recorded, settled into me. They weren't just data. They were reminders that healing doesn't always begin with reconciliation. Sometimes it starts the moment you stop explaining your hurt. Late one afternoon, as I was preparing a presentation, an email notification appeared at the corner of my screen. The subject line read, "Can we talk?" It was from Dylan. I hesitated before opening it. The message was short. He wrote that things at home were falling apart. Sarah had ended her engagement after discovering Jason's betrayal, and the house had become a battleground of blame. He sounded older somehow, his words stripped of the easy charm he once used to survive in that house. He ended with, "I miss you. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen until the words blurred, then typed a simple reply. "Yes, Sunday. Call me at 6. When Sunday came, the call connected with a soft crackle. Dylan's voice sounded tired but genuine. "You look good. he said after a long pause, as if seeing me through the screen made him realize how much time had passed. So do you? I said, though he looked worn. How's school? Fine, he said, then shook his head. Actually, not great. Things at home are bad, Alicia. Sarah's been having these outbursts. Mom and Dad don't know how to handle her. It's like they're seeing what you saw all along, and they can't fix it. His honesty was gentle, but it landed like truth always does, quiet, sharp, undeniable. I'm sorry, I said. That can't be easy for any of you. He hesitated. I keep thinking about how you left. I didn't get it before, but now I do. The way he said it loosened something in me I didn't know was still tight. It took me a long time to understand that leaving wasn't about giving up on them, I said softly. It was about giving myself a chance to breathe. We talked for nearly an hour, about his classes, his plans, how strange it felt to see the family unravel. By the end, we were laughing lightly, as if finding a fragile bridge between then and now. Before we hung up, he said, I want to visit. Spring break starts in 2 weeks. Would that be okay? Of course, I said. I'd like that. When the day arrived, I met him at the airport. He looked taller, older, but his eyes were the same warm, searching. We drove through the city in comfortable silence, the rain streaking across the windshield. Seattle seemed to calm him. He loved the water, the mountains peeking through the clouds, the calm hum of the streets. I showed him the Preston Center, introduced him to my colleagues, and took him to the cafe near the pier where I always wrote my reports. On the third morning, as we sat across from each other, he said quietly, You seem free. The word made me smile. I think I am, I said, for the first time. That evening, we cooked dinner together in my small kitchen. He told stories about the house, about Mom's new obsession with self-help podcasts, and Dad's sudden decision to take early retirement. He mentioned that they'd started therapy, something I never thought I'd hear. They're trying, he said. It's awkward, but I think they finally see how things were. After he went to bed, I sat alone at the table, turning the thought over in my mind. Trying wasn't the same as changing, but it was a start. A few nights later, after Dylan returned home, I received an email from Mom. The subject line simply read, I'm sorry. The letter was longer than any message she'd ever sent me. She admitted the truth of what I'd lived through, the favoritism, the excuses, the silence that had made me invisible. She wrote about her own therapy, about learning how love can look like control when it isn't rooted in understanding. At the end, she said, I don't expect you to forgive us right away. I just want you to know we finally see it. I sat with the email for a long time. For years, I'd dreamed of hearing those words. But now that they had come, I felt something different, not relief, not triumph, but calm. Maybe it wasn't about being seen anymore. Maybe it was about what I saw in myself. The next day, during my therapy session, I showed the message to Dr. Amara. She read it quietly, then looked at me. What do you want to do with this? She asked. I'm not sure, I said honestly. Part of me wants to respond. Another part wants to let it sit. There's no rush, she said gently. Healing doesn't move on their timeline. Her words stayed with me. I waited a week before replying, writing a short, careful note. I thanked them for the apology and said I was willing to talk, but that I needed boundaries. No guilt, no interruptions, no talk of Sarah's troubles. I hit send and waited without expectation. The call came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Mom's voice trembled at first, then steadied. She told me about the therapy sessions, how they'd begun unpacking decades of behavior they'd never questioned. Dad joined the call halfway through. His tone was humble in a way I'd never heard before. I thought I was being fair, he said. But I see now that fairness without awareness isn't fairness at all. I listened more than I spoke. When they asked if I forgave them, I said, "Forgiveness is a process, but I'm not angry anymore. That's something." After the call ended, I stepped outside. The sun was low, painting the buildings in warm streaks of amber. The water shimmered beneath the dock, gentle and steady. I realized then that closure doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it drifts toward you slowly, like the tide, never loud, never sudden, but sure. Weeks later, I organized a small gathering in my apartment. Maria helped me hang blue and gold streamers, and Kira, my neighbor, brought a cake. We called it my do-over celebration, a quiet tribute to the graduation day that never was. As the evening unfolded, laughter filled the room. Professor Winters joined over video, raising a glass to toast my new publication and the research team I'd helped build. When the group sang a soft, off-key version of "For She's a Jolly Good Fellow," I laughed so hard I nearly cried. But when the music faded, I felt something deeper, a peace that no ceremony back home could have given me. Later that night, after everyone left, I stood by the window watching the city lights shimmer on the water. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Thinking of you tonight," she wrote. "We're proud of you. Truly." I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. The message sat there like a quiet acknowledgement of change. Somewhere across the country, the house I grew up in might still carry the same walls, but the echo inside it had shifted. The rain started again, soft, rhythmic, familiar. I made a cup of tea and turned off the lights. The room glowed faintly from the city outside, warm and safe. For the first time, I felt the future unfolding, not as something to chase, but as something already beginning. I thought of the girl who once stood under stage lights, searching for 5 empty seats, and realized she'd finally stopped looking. The morning after that soft rain, the air carried the smell of wet cedar and coffee drifting from the shop below my apartment. The city was quiet, suspended between spring and summer. Light settled across the windowsill in slow bands, touching the stack of notebooks on my desk, and the framed photograph of the Puget Sound I'd taken my first week in Seattle. It was one of those mornings that didn't need plans or conversation to feel full. I sat at the table with a mug warming my hands, watching the ferries move across the water. The calm outside matched something in me I hadn't felt in years. Not relief, something steadier. A kind of belonging that didn't depend on anyone else showing up. Work had become a rhythm I loved. At the Preston Center, I had stepped fully into the lead role on our resilience project. We were preparing for publication an article titled "Patterns of Healing: The Psychology of Self-Renewal After Family Neglect." Dr. Chen had asked me to co-present the findings at an upcoming conference. When I told him I wasn't sure I was ready, he smiled in that knowing way of his. "You've been ready," he said. "Now it's just time to believe it." That belief had taken time. There were still days when doubt came, like fog, quiet, blurring the edges. But then someone like Maria would drop by my office with 2 coffees and say, "You looked lost in thought again," and I'd laugh, reminded that my world was wider than the one I left behind. 2 weeks later, on a late May afternoon, a package arrived from Boston. The handwriting on the label was unmistakable, Mom's. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear the brown paper. Inside was a small wooden box lined with velvet. Beneath it, a note written in her looping script. "Alicia, this belonged to Grandma Rose. She asked me to save it for the day you found peace. I think that day has come. Love, Mom." Inside the box was a silver locket tarnished at the edges, but beautifully simple. When I opened it, I found a tiny pressed violet inside, perfectly preserved. I traced the smooth metal with my thumb, remembering Grandma's hands the way she'd always told me that flowers didn't compete. They just bloomed where they were planted. That evening, I wore the locket while I walked along the waterfront. The city glowed in gold and soft gray, the mountains barely visible in the distance. It felt like Grandma's voice was there in the air, somewhere saying that peace doesn't arrive as a reward. It settles when you finally stop fighting the wind. A week later, my phone rang while I was leaving work. The caller ID read Mom. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was gentler now, quieter around the edges. I didn't want anything, she said quickly. I just wanted to tell you, your father and I are proud of you. I smiled into the fading light. Thank you, I said. That means more than you know. There was a pause. Then she added, Sarah's been going to therapy too. She's realizing how much she hurt you. She wants to apologize someday when you're ready. I didn't answer right away. The old version of me would have filled the silence with forgiveness, would have offered comfort for her discomfort. But the woman standing in the Seattle dusk just breathed. Maybe, I said softly, when it feels right. And that was enough. That summer passed in the gentlest way. Dylan visited again in July, taller and steadier, with a quiet pride in his voice when he told me he'd been accepted to a state university. He helped me hang shelves in the kitchen and teased me about my growing plant collection. One evening, while we watched the sunset turn the water pink, he said, You know the house feels different now. Calmer. Mom listens more. Dad too. I think you started something. I looked at him and smiled. Maybe we all did. When he left, the apartment felt bigger, but not empty. The quiet wasn't loneliness anymore. It was space. By early autumn, I'd finished the paper and presented it with Dr. Chen at the conference. The room was filled with professionals from across the country. People who'd spent their lives studying what I had lived. My voice only trembled once when I spoke about resilience as a kind of quiet rebellion, the choice to live fully despite being unseen. When the session ended, Dr. Chen shook my hand and said, Your story lives between the lines of your research. That's what gives it weight. On the flight home, I looked out over the clouds and thought about how far I'd come, not just in miles, but in heart. I no longer carried the ache of being invisible. It had become something else, something softer. Perspective, maybe. Gratitude for the people who had stepped in where family once failed. When I returned to Seattle, I hosted a small dinner with Maria Kira and a few new friends from the center. The evening light poured through the windows and laughter drifted through the open kitchen. At one point, Kira lifted her glass and said, To found families and second beginnings. We clinked glasses, and the warmth of that moment settled deep in my chest. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I stepped onto my balcony. The city lights shimmered against the sound, the same view that had greeted me when I first arrived. I thought of the girl who once stood alone on a graduation stage, searching for faces that never came. She was still a part of me, but she wasn't waiting anymore. She'd learned that sometimes you don't get the applause you deserve, but you still walk forward. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of rain and salt. I leaned against the railing, touching the locket at my throat. Somewhere inside me, forgiveness had taken quiet root, not as permission, but as release. My family was still learning, still healing. So was I. But I finally understood that healing isn't measured by who returns. It's measured by how freely you can breathe without them. A soft breeze passed through the city, stirring the leaves in the street below. I whispered a small thank you to Grandma Rose, to Olivia, to Professor Winters, to everyone who had helped me see that peace isn't the absence of pain, but the decision to stop carrying it. The fairy lights glided across the dark water like slow-moving stars. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was watching life happen from the outside. I was part of it, steady, present enough. Some wounds don't fade because we forgive. They fade because we outgrow the need for proof. And in that outgrowing, we find freedom. If this story touched something in you, tell me where you're listening from. I'd love to know. And if you've ever found your own kind of peace after being overlooked, share it in the comments. Thank you for spending this time with me. And remember, you are already enough exactly as you are.